So welcome to Northern Powerhouses, our business success stories series of interviews where we discuss with local business leaders, their backgrounds, their successes and challenges, and what's really driving them forwards. And this morning, I'm delighted to have with us Jo Dawson, who's the chairman at the H. Dawson Group. So firstly, Jo, thank you so much for your time this morning. And if you'd like to introduce yourself and H. Dawson Group and how you help people and your clients, that would be great.
Well, thanks very much indeed for inviting me into this today, Chris, much appreciated. So my name is Jo Dawson. I'm the chairman and CEO of H. Dawson, HD Wool and Wool Keepers. We are a group of companies which are working on taking wool and using the commerce of wool to make a positive impact.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And I noticed from looking at your website, you obviously have got a family, multi-generational family business. So if just a potted history, how far back do you go?
So my great-grandfather started our business in 1888, and he traveled to Australia and on a steamer and would buy wool and then come back and sell it in the UK. And then that moved to becoming an international wool trading business, from buying wool from anywhere to selling wool to anywhere. And each generation that's taken the business on has done its best to break the business and then to effectively transform it into other ways. And I'm no different. So I've basically taken what was a wool trading business and moved it into a supply chain management business with a fundamental environmental focus. So what we've done over the last 5 years or so, maybe actually no, about 10-20 years really, but more focused in the last few years, has been to focus on buying directly from the farmer where we possibly can, and to put traceable, independently verified supply chains which have got very high animal welfare and also high animal environmental credentials, and taking that wool and putting it into products which are fit for the modern consumer, and which have got the potential to transform their lives and also the lives of the supply chain. Because we set out to make sure that everybody benefits from this. So sustainability is a three-legged stool, and one of those aspects is the financial side. And if the farmer is not making money out of wool, then effectively it's an unsustainable product. So from our perspective, our objective is to make sure that the farmer is profitable from a wool perspective, and also then that product is transformed into a meaningful end product that the final consumer can really benefit from it throughout its life. And I think what we see is that from an agricultural perspective, there is a potential to move towards regenerative agriculture, and what we are doing is working with our farmers to help them to regenerate the soil, which then improves biodiversity, carbon capture, and also water retention, all of those sort of things, overall soil health. That can effectively, if you do it at scale, can help reverse climate change. So it's a very powerful story, and one that we're trying to link up the farm and all the way through to the end user.
Wow, that's amazing. And I mean, as you talk, that model feels and like the model that it should be for everything produced on a farm. You know, that whole, you know, as you say, farm from a food perspective, farm to fork, sort of knowing where things come from. So wonderful. But you know, the impact on climate as well, it's just fascinating. I know this might seem an obvious question, given obviously it's a family business going back many years, but if we could tell you a little bit more about your background, specifically how you got into business and why this particular one, although I'm guessing that's probably a fairly obvious question.
So when I actually did international management and French as my degree, and then traveled around the world and worked in our various offices in Australia, New Zealand, and learned the trade over there. But I didn't set out to join the business. That was not my objective. Well, I didn't really know exactly which direction I was going to go in, and I didn't feel pressure to go into the business, but then thought I'd try it out and see what happened. And here we are. Quite a few years later, with me running it, but in a different format than it was when I started.
Wow. So the whole part about the sustainability, the environmental impact, that's your influence and that's your sort of stamp on the businesses as they stand.
I think so, yeah, absolutely. Because I came into the business and we were international wool trading, moving containers of wool from anywhere to anywhere. And it was a deflationary business, textiles, and selling a product where you would be moving a container of wool from one country to another country to another country, effectively to gain a couple of cents a kilo. And it just did not make sense to me. So I felt that we had something very special in our hands, that we had a very clever product. Wool is a really clever fiber, and it really has been undervalued and poorly marketed. And I felt that we were not adding enough value to that. So I felt that we had to transform, take some of that product, transform it into finished product or into components, and then sell it through into the supply chain. But then it's not just that, as the fact that we are impacting on natural systems. So working with farmers who are so driven to look after their animals, and also look after the environment, that story also needed to be told. So we want to identify those farmers who are really going above and beyond, work with them, support them to be able to go even further, and also then communicate that through to the end user.
Yeah, brilliant. Wonderful. So you mentioned this isn't necessarily what you plan to do. What were your plans growing up? What was the thing that you always wanted to do?
Well, interestingly enough, so I said to in the careers officer at school, when they gave us a great big dot matrix printout of all the opportunities that you had, I said I wanted to work outside and inside, and consequently didn't do that. But they came up and said you need to be an air traffic controller. So I don't really understand how an air traffic controller is an outside job, but I didn't get into that. I ended up into international wool trading, and then and moved into where we are now.
Wonderful, wonderful. So looking back over the development of the group of businesses, what would you say are some of the biggest issues you've had to overcome?
Well, within the business, we was a global business working on different continents without computerization. And so effectively, I've basically computerized the heritage business of multiple continents. And other things I guess would be, managing a global team in a business format that didn't really resonate with me. That was a real challenge. And effectively, and then that transformation of that business and how we did that. I tried the evolution approach, and probably should have gone for the revolution approach. And I think that's the biggest learning, I think, for me.
Great. So I'm keen to know what you've learned. So just explain that a little bit more about the difference from your perspective, and why. Yeah, what you would have done differently, but what do you sort of mean by evolution and revolution? So
I think evolution. I think what I tried to do was to take the team on a journey, and a change journey from where we were, but I think it was too hard to do that, and I think it needed a real shock approach to be able to then transform and shift. And also skill sets were another thing as well. It's the skill sets required to do different things and to be able to deliver different products and different outcomes. And so that's required quite a fundamental change actually across the business. And also I think there's some people have gone on the journey and others haven't. So it's been quite a transformation.
It can be. Well, is often very challenging, and I think the sort of brain likes patterns, likes familiarity, and it's the idea. I think they use in NLP the idea of a pattern interrupt, which is literally something quite shocking and severe, which I guess is the idea of the revolution. Enables the brain to break the pattern and then go, okay, let's do it different. Allows it to do things differently. If we try small changes, you say typically the human condition tries to bring us back to where we were. But if you sort of take it so far away from where you were, then it's very difficult to get back. Absolutely,
and that's what I found. And so I tried to do that in a way which was actually taking people on that journey, but it was very difficult to do. I mean, interesting. I think whilst the pandemic was a really tough time for so many, and it was the incredible loss of life is not something to be talked about lightly. The opportunity that presented for change and for a shift in mindset was
Yes.
quite something, and people then in that situation are also can be moved in a certain direction. And I think at least a portion of society has actually started to think far more about longevity and also about the environment, and about their place in the world, really.
Yep.
You know, we often talk about nature as something outside of us, but we're actually part of it. And I think that shift in mindset is a really important one, actually, and one that we've got to make sure we don't lose.
Yes, I 100% agree. I mean, we've always done a lot of work with organisations on purpose and values, but I suppose looking backwards over a few years, historically there was a skepticism to the importance of that, and now there's very much more an embracement. Yes, I get it. When people understand what's important to us, and where we're going, our vision, and why we're doing what we're doing, they can sign on to it a lot more. And certainly from both a marketing, but probably even more importantly, a recruitment and retention point of view of team, is we find teams really need and want to know where the business is going, what's important to it.
Absolutely.
And that's a big part of both joining and staying. That makes a lot of sense. Any other key learnings that you've had in business in general that stand out?
It's a really, really good question. I think for me, I think the staying committed is really, really important. Being resilient, I think, and also really honest with the team about where we are.
Yeah.
I think is really important. I think also it's equally very important to keep communicating,
Yes.
and I think that sharing of where it's quite interesting, actually. Sometimes you'll have a presentation or a discussion internally, and you might not get any feedback, but then there's some of the comments you've made in a presentation come winding their way back to you. So people have actually been listening. They might not actually necessarily feed back to you about that, but are actually on board with the conversation, and it's quite an interesting dynamic there. So the communication, I think, is really, really important. And obviously the fairly hackneyed one, but it's actually true. Fail fast. If we actually aren't doing it right well at the beginning, we actually need to recognise that and then change.
No, that makes absolute sense. And yes, I guess, well, I know that different people take different times to process. So some people will get things straight away in a meeting and they go, yeah, brilliant, love it. But some people do need that time just to process in, and even can almost reject in a meeting, and then the process actually allows them to come back and finally it's understanding that, I think, is quite key. You're probably aware we're a coaching organisation. I'm keen to know who the best coach or coaches you've ever had, not necessarily in business, but business, life, sport, and the people that stand out for you that have guided your career.
I think I early on. So when I did a buyout of the wider family in 2006, and then employed a chairman for me. So I was obviously there, but I employed somebody to actually to chair the business. And he was an incredible inspiration and help for me, particularly during the transformation of the company, and through what were pretty traumatic times. As an individual, you're taking on a very long heritage, and also an obligation, and that also is challenging for you to put it in a format where it needs to fundamentally shift. And so I think having somebody alongside you in that situation, like for me anyway, I found that extremely helpful, and somebody who could absolutely trust and have a dialogue with which was outside of the business, but then talking about what we were trying to achieve together, I think was really important.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think one thing that most people in business or business owners realize that maybe other people don't is it's quite a lonely place, isn't it? Because it's we don't have, we can't really, if we've got challenges, we don't, talking to a team about them isn't necessarily the right thing if they're a significant challenge to the business. We don't, or certainly shouldn't, take up challenges home into our families, and it can be quite a lonely place. But so often having someone to talk to, I think, is quite key. I mean, I have my own coach because it really helps me in what I do, and I guess it's practicing what we preach. But And through your career, have you picked up any? This is my favourite bit. Any favourite quotes or sayings that you fall back on a regular basis, or you find yourself saying a lot?
It's a really good question. I think for me, one of my favorite sayings is, "How do you eat an elephant? One spoon at a time."
Brilliant.
You know, and I think that's a really important one for me. I think what else would I say? I think, but actually in life in general, I genuinely feel this is that most things happen for a reason. And I think it's a matter of actually accepting where you are, and rather than railing against it necessarily, then, you know, give yourself that agency to change. And I think that's a really important one. And then the other one more recently, actually, that I think has been very important for me, actually, is as a phrase which is about working with people and saying, effectively, I said to the team, we want to work with people that we enjoy working with.
Great.
And that talks about employees within the business and also customers and suppliers. So partners, the people we actually want to work with and we enjoy working with. And I think that's a really important way, and that allows you then to actually have a more enjoyable interaction during your working life.
100%. Really interesting. You said 100%. We've always talked in what we do with businesses about A, B, C, D clients, and starting to identify what makes an A grade client. They love us. Because they love us, they get why we do what we do. So price isn't really an issue for them, and they and then refer us to the great people and different categories. And the more we started to talk about this, the more that was also clear for employees, that if we find that A grade employees, they love what we do, they're committed to the cause of the purpose, which means that problems that arise are less of a problem, because it's the bigger picture is more important. So it's really interesting to say that, because a lot of people sort of separate that difference, but for me it all comes together. It's attracting people, whether they're customers, whether they're team, whether they're suppliers, and finding the right mixes. It's interesting a couple of things you said there, because the one step at a time I read or listened to, actually, because it's great as an audio, but Will Smith's autobiography, and obviously there's a bit of bad press recently with his behaviors, but one of the things he talked about really early on is his father making him and his brother build this massive wall. They knocked down the wall that was around their home, and it was, for him as a sort of 10-year-old, it was 20 yards long and 6 foot high, and it was literally brick by brick. And he said, I can't, to imagine building this thing was impossible, but I could imagine putting the next brick on and the next brick on. And when you talked about eating the elephant, that makes absolute sense. So
you've got to start somewhere, and I think this is the thing that you can. I think one of I can't remember, one of the Chinese Sun Tzu, a long journey starts with a single step, and I think it's exactly that thing of that feeling of having to make for. Often we procrastinate, and often we won't do it because we're actually not exactly sure. But you've got to start, and also then continue. But it's one step at a time, and working your way through, and bit by bit, it starts to become clear. And I think one of the other things I would say is that you read business books or look at some of the supposedly successful entrepreneurs, and it appears from the outside that they knew exactly where they were going when they started. It was a straight line, and it's absolutely not the case. They'll work it out as they're going along, like most people, I think, and some will have a great deal of fortune, and others a great deal of challenge. But I think it's definitely, life isn't a straight line. I think it's a series of you're up against bumper bars, and you can set your own bumper bars and try and make it less of a zigzag. But it's not a straight line.
And it's accepting that, isn't it? As you rightly said. I think one of my colleagues talked recently about everything is neutral until we add meaning to it. And it's our choice what meaning we add to it, whatever that is. And it's accepting that things are okay. We don't have to. There's no norms or there may be some standards that many people operate, but we don't have to follow the same thought processes when something goes wrong or there's a challenge. We get to choose if we want to. That's that's what part of making being human is. So I guess
It's true. It is true.
yeah.
We do set a load of constraints around ourselves that we don't necessarily need to be there. But at the same time, yeah, we have social norms to go to work within as well.
So what have you learned about yourself as you've grown your career in the business?
It's a really good question. I think I found out that I'm very resilient. I probably, I don't know, you remember the Weebles as you know, that's
Yes.
you
Yes.
can knock me over, but I'll bounce back up again. I think also I've learned that I have the capacity to inspire others with a vision which resonates, and I think that's important.
Brilliant.
But the thing linked with that though is that I've learned that I need to surround myself by people who are capable of helping me join the dots between today and that vision for the future.
Yeah.
And that's a really important learning for me.
Brilliant. Absolutely. You've got me there. I'm very visual, so I've already seen a Weeble. I'm going to go find some and use that as an example of resilience, Joe. So thank you. That's one of my learning points for today. I appreciate that. We'll go and find some Weebles. So talk about the futures. What does the future look like, and what challenges do you face, if any, would you say?
I think, well, it's a really good question. I mean, look, you can read the news and or watch TV, and it can be quite challenging, I think. Climate change is absolutely the biggest challenge. I saw a really very powerful graphic during the pandemic, which was of 3 tidal waves, which was one of them was the pandemic as a tidal wave, and that is, but the image was really quite powerful, where the further tidal waves after that and climate change and nature collapse were by far bigger than this, and so where we were living through what was a very challenging period, we felt that was the end of the world, but in reality there is the potential for that from a climate change perspective. So that is a very challenging outlook for us all, but at the same time I feel extremely positive given what we're doing, in that I feel that, if I look at in our area, sheep are managing pasture, and well managed sheep and ruminants, if they're managing pasture and reversing desertification and improving soil health, carbon capture, also root growth. So planting trees, super important. In addition, also then reclaiming some of that pasture land in a positive way, and helping farmers to manage that in a way where the roots actually grow and continue to grow, is a very, very important step. And that in its own way can actually make a fundamental shift and actually capture an enormous amount of carbon. So we have in our hands a mechanism, a carbon sink, that we can then drive in a positive way. So from our perspective, I see that if we can do that at scale around the world, then I think we've got a real fighting chance. This is not about building a shiny machine that's going to capture carbon. We already have one in our hands, and it's called pasture land. And I think that's what we can do at scale. So from my perspective, I see ourselves as the bridge between that sort of activity and the consumer, and helping the consumer to understand. I don't like the word consumer. I prefer the word custodian, actually, because they are a custodian of our product. And so I would say that we can then link those people and help them to understand that their actions can make a positive impact by purchasing product from these systems. Then I think we've got a real opportunity to help reverse climate change. And I think if we can do it at scale, I genuinely think we've got something positive to deliver. So there are quite a lot of vested interests against that, and that's pretty well known, I think, particularly with the oil industry, but and others. But I think overall, if we can start to take hold of the awakening that has actually happened, I think, as a result of the pandemic, and improve on that drumbeat of change, I think there's a positive future for us.
Wonderful. That's well said. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Absolutely brilliant. And just a few questions before we sort of close. What would I'm keen to know what you'd say to anyone that was thinking of going into business right now?
Well, definitely go for it. I would say absolutely try it. I'd say one thing, an important one, is be very, very clear how you're going to generate cash. I think that's a really important point. So the concept, we can all become a bit misty-eyed about our beautiful vision or our concept, but we've got to also be really realistic about where the cash is going to come from. And I think there are, I don't know, there's some crazy statistic about well over 75% of startups will fail, and the main reason why is they run out of cash, and the expectation. And also, if you're going to do it from a self-employed perspective, you've got to work out how you're going to pay yourself and how you're going to pay your bills. And so I think that view and that vision of where is the cash going to come from, I think is really, really important. And also, I would say at the moment, there is more local government support than there has been in a long time. And I'd say reach out to local organizations and take the opportunity for mentoring, business training support, those sorts of things to help put your idea into place. And that's something I think which is really useful. Yeah,
brilliant. And if you started again, is there anything you'd do differently looking backwards?
Well, for a start, I didn't start our business, we talked about earlier on. I go for revolution instead of evolution, and I absolutely would do that. And I'd also, I think early on, I recognize this early on, but I would also play that back. I think is to get closer to the end user of the product as quickly as possible.
Yeah, brilliant. No, I appreciate it started, but it sounds like you transformed it. So I think that's wonderful. And what advice would you give to an 18-year-old you if you're able to go back in time and do so, Joe?
I think if I was more of a sprinter than a marathon runner. But what I think I would say that sprinting is a good quality, but learn how to run a marathon. And I think that's an important one. And also then basically ask yourself, what does good look like? What does good look like for you in 5 years? And then write it down. And then come back to it and say, how are you going to get there? And challenge yourself to say, what does good look like? I think is a really simple and important question. And then try and find a way of actually bridging the gap with that, and then set some milestones along the way, and keep coming back to that.
I think it was Stephen Covey talks about starting with the end in mind. I think that's really, really key. Is what does it look like? And the other thing that we often talk to people about, and I often say, is look, vision what you want, but trying to spend reality while you're doing it, because most people, adjust their long-term vision or goals or dreams by what they perceive to be current reality. And it's such a shame, because there really isn't anything that can't be achieved in 5 to 7 years. If we understand the investment of time, energy, effort, money, and risk, there's nothing we can't achieve. So if we really want something to happen, it's about just defining it, and then, as you said, working back. Then the question is how. And if a how is impossible, then maybe change it. But normally the how is there. It's just whether we choose to, invest in that financially, time-wise, risk-wise, stress-wise. I
think so. The one other thing I would say actually as well is the Simon Sinek piece as well, about starting with the why. And I think that's something, back as an 18-year-old, is trying to identify why do you want to do this, and that's really hard. And I think it's very hard for most of us, so we end up spending more time on the what and the how, but then trying to articulate why are we doing this. And that's probably the bit that I found the most difficult actually during my career in the former business, really, is working in a business that didn't really make sense to me, and it didn't resonate in a way, and that why was very difficult to find. So having done that now in the transformation of the business, the why is very clear. And then that becomes clear to yourself. It also becomes clear to your team, and it also becomes clear to your customers. So that becomes a very easy conversation to have.
Absolutely couldn't agree more. I think it all starts with vision, values, purpose, and then work back from there. And it, you know, it that lends into recruitment, marketing, everything is sits around those core pillars. Well, Jack, thank you so much. It's been a wonderful conversation, really valuable and really useful, and I have to say very insightful in terms of looking forward into the future. And it'd be great to you know, swing back in 9-12 months and just see how things have developed and where we're going with this. And
I'd be delighted to.
Firstly, thank you. And if anyone would like to get in touch with you or your company, what would be the best way of doing so?
I would say probably the best way to go to the website, so hdawson.com. And then just zap a message through there, or I'm on LinkedIn, so Jo Dawson, and hopefully we can collaborate going forward in a positive way.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much once again.
It's a pleasure, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you.